As soon as the enemy's round shot came hopping along, we simply did the polite. Opened out and allowed them to pass on. There's nothing lost by politeness, even on a battlefield. Presently they began to pitch their shot and shell right amongst us, and our men began to fall. I felt horribly sick, cold shiver running through my veins.
Down by the sea, the French Zouaves were finally given the order to scale the cliffs.
So voila, we set off boldly, 250 of us, clambering like cats, urging one another on. When our battery emerged upon the plateau, the guns made terrifying breaches in the enemy lines, and you could see whole rows of Russian infantry mowed down by the same cannonball.
On the main battlefield, Private Gowing and the Royal Fusiliers were advancing straight towards the big Russian guns.
We were only about 600 yards from the mouth of the guns. The thunderbolts of war were not far apart, and death loves a crowd. The havoc among the Fusiliers was awful. Still, nothing but death could stop that renowned infantry. We had to fight against tremendous odds. At the top of the hill, our colonel exclaimed when he sounded the assembly, "Where's my poor old Fusiliers? My God, my God." And he cried like a child, wringing his hands.
Despite the harrowing losses, the Fusiliers took the Russian gun position. The gentry on the hill ran for cover, and Prince Menshikov ordered the retreat.
Our army was utterly routed and beaten out of an almost unassailable position. I asked the commander of our battalion where we were going, but even the major didn't know. He had no orders where to go. We all stared at each other and wondered where we should find ourselves. We were like a flock of lost sheep without a shepherd. Captain Khodasevich, Tarutin Regiment.
That evening, William Howard Russell walked across the fields above the River Alma.
One who has not seen cannot conceive the relics of a great fight, especially on such a field as that of the Alma. There was an immense accumulation of camp litter on the hillsides. There was a sickening, sour, fetid smell everywhere, and the grass was sloppy with blood.
The exhausted troops dispersed.
We went into the vineyards and got some grapes. These were the first grapes we'd seen. From there we went into the village which the enemy had burnt. Here the surgeons had established a field hospital, several of whom were hard at work amputating limbs. There was a large heap of detached limbs lying in the yard, and many poor fellows waiting their turn. Private Albert Mitchell.
The young soldiers who died at Alma had opened up the road to Sebastopol, but the generals did not take it. They decided to march their army in a different direction, a decision that would lead to hundreds of thousands more deaths on the shores of the Crimea. The Allied army had decided to march around Sebastopol and attack it from the south, using the harbour of Balaclava to bring ashore all the equipment needed to mount a proper siege. The man responsible for this disastrous move was Raglan's chief strategist, General Burgoyne. He was 71 years old and argued the only way to take a fortified city was to do it by the book. Bring up the big guns and knock down the fortifications. This would take weeks. Some Allied commanders were horrified by this delay. Looking down on Sebastopol, General Sir George Cathcart could see it was an easy target.
I'm sure I could walk into it with scarcely the loss of a man, at night or an hour before day. We could leave our packs and run into it even in open daylight, only risking a few shots from their gun positions. We see people walking about the streets in great consternation.
In the town, the people were as busy as ants, working day and night at their defenses. In fact, all seemed to be seized with a kind of panic. Admiral Kornilov appeared to have a power of multiplying himself, for he was everywhere, promising large rewards to all, if they could only keep the town. Captain Hodasevich, Tarutin Regiment.
The problem facing the Russian naval commanders was not just how to defend Sebastopol from the land, but also how to prevent the Allied fleet attacking from the sea.
The naval commanders were highly intelligent. They quickly saw that they had no role on sea once the French and British navies had arrived. The Allies were overwhelmingly superior. So what they did was to sink some of their ships in a way to block a direct Allied naval assault on Sebastopol, and to land most of the crews. And the crews from the naval units, excellently commanded by the admirals, and with morale very high, formed the backbone of the defence.
The British and French had travelled 2,000 miles to sink the Black Sea Fleet. Now the Russian Navy had done the job themselves. Meanwhile, the Allied army had completed their march around Sebastopol. Just 6 days after storming the heights of Alma, they arrived in Balaclava. From now on, this cramped harbour was the centre of British army activity in the Crimean War. Its name would become synonymous with terrible suffering and extraordinary courage. For the Rifle Brigade, arriving in Balaclava meant a well-earned rest.
I've been sleeping in the open air with my clothes on now for 19 days. Sickness prevails to a great extent, so our company is reduced from 143 to 70. You must tender my kindest love to Sarah, and ask her how she would like to see her brother come home with one leg. I fancy I should be a comical fellow. But without joking, I thought I would be shot in 50 places at Alma. It is curious work to be dodging cannonballs all day. I hope I shall be as lucky in the next affair. Your affectionate brother, Harry Blishen.
As the British made their base in Balaclava, the French organised themselves a few miles away in the more spacious harbour at Kamish. Both armies got on with building up their siege operations.
Clearly the biggest mistake the Allies made in the entire Crimean campaign was to march around Sevastopol and attempt to set up a regular siege. This allowed the Russians to bring in their excellent field engineers and to call up the guns from the naval dockyard. The two armies then set about digging themselves ever deeper into trench systems which look remarkably like the Western Front.
The Allies continued to help the Russians by wasting time. It took them 3 weeks to bring their big guns into position. By the time Fanny Jubilee turned up, the British hadn't yet managed to open fire, but they had attracted the attention of the Russian gunners.
About 1,000 yards from us lay the forts of Sebastopol. The shot and shell came hissing every 2 minutes. We were standing on the brow of a hill, backed by our magnificent troops and fronting the enemy, the doomed city beneath our feet. It was indeed a moment worth 100 years of everyday existence.